You know, Todd, I want you to help me explain what's going on here. This politicization of the ESG process is a rather disturbing to me. We've all been following this for many years, but this is a new wrinkle. Now, you got a new piece out called ESG is not the Dark Lord we do not speak of. This is a Harry Potter reference, folks, in case you don't get it. We used to argue about how ESG indexes are constructed, what weighting to give E versus S versus G. Mona and I have been doing this for a long time, what should be included or excluded. But this is different. This is an attack on the very concept of ESG itself. What's the overall industry's response to this?
Well, this is just ludicrous. Simply, ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. And the focus has been on the E part of it, the environmental aspect, and whether companies are too focused on climate change and what's happening related to that. But what you have is broadly diversified strategies that are giving you the best according to not just climate change, but also related to fair pay practices, gender diversity, a whole host of factors. There's 30 different sub-factors that are used by MSCI, many that are also used by S&P as well. It's really important. I wish we could go back to the days of arguing what is inside the portfolio and whether ESG is really the Dark Lord.
Yeah, you know, you have noted the ESG business is very multifaceted. It's got a lot of different aspects to the whole thing, a lot of different approaches. Some of the largest ESG funds out there have very meaningful stakes in the energy industry. You know, BlackRock's the ones who's been close to boycotting. Their ESG funds, two of them, have essentially above average weightings for energy stocks compared to the S&P, or about equal to them. I'm looking at two of them right here. ESGU has 4.8%, SUSA has 3.8%. That's the weighting of the S&P for energy stocks. I'm not sure this argument is true. In other words, what I'm saying is they're boycotting energy stocks. They're actually not, it seems to me.
That's right. The argument falls down once you dive into it, because Exxon and Chevron and Schlumberger are part of the portfolio here. So people either rail against ESG because they think it's focusing too much on climate change, or they rail against ESG because they believe that it has too much exposure to energy. So how can you be favoring ESG and still have exposure to these large cap multinational energy companies? You can have both. These are intended to be broadly diversified products. They're not the devil. There's nothing wrong with them, but you can either invest in them or not, and that's up to you. We don't need the government weighing in on that.
You know, Mona, one thing that's amazing to me, Todd's pointed this out before, is for all this brouhaha, the ESG industry is actually pretty small compared to the overall business, even the ETF business. Todd points out there's 186 ESG ETFs. That's only 6% of the ETF universe, and it's about $100 billion. That's about 1.5% of the dollar value of the whole ETF business. This seems like an awful lot of attention for a small outlay.
Yeah, you're right, but I think the challenge is it's still unclear how we exactly define ESG. So I've heard some measures say as much as 1 out of every $3 of professionally managed assets are in some ESG fund or another. That's actually the crux of the issue. It's how pure are you being in terms of your definition? What is the perception, your expectation about what you want these funds to include? And that's why I think there's so much confusion, because we're talking about funds that have different objectives that are all valid. It just depends on the individual investor. Some want to divest completely. That's fine. Some want to engage companies to work with them to improve. That's also fine. But I think to paint all sustainable funds with the same brush and to expect the same outcomes, and then to end up, calculating the AUM based on those definitions is actually doing a disservice to the many different individual perspectives that investors that may have that are valid, and the choice that we should be giving investors in a free market.